Ever since I was a kid, I've been obsessed with returning things. I would always take or borrow toys from other children and not touch them until the next day when I gave it back. I don't know what it was, and I still don't. I just got some kind of satisfaction from giving something back to someone. As I grew up, the problem never stopped. I would borrow money, clothes, CDs, and games just so I could return them to the person who had lent it to me. It's a weird thing, I know. My mom and dad were always confused by it and had been trying to get me to go to therapy for years. I never did. Eventually, it subsided when I left high school. I had stopped borrowing things intentionally. But I still got that kick when I actually needed to borrow something. I still felt something when I returned it. I got a normal, mundane office job in an apartment and was relatively happy with my life. Although I did have the occasional blip, my obsession was hardly affecting my life. By the time I got married, I had almost completely forgotten about it. My wife was expecting, we had almost finished moving out into our new house, and I got a promotion in my office job. Everything was looking up. But as you may have expected, that's when everything started to go wrong. It all started that winter. My wife was 7 months pregnant, and we had almost finished decorating the baby's room. However, there was a bad storm that hit the town where we lived. The torrential rain and strong winds have damaged our roof badly, and we couldn't afford to get it fixed. My wife suggested we take out a loan, and so we did for $20,000. We had the roof fixed up, and I started working overtime to pay it off. I didn't pay much attention to the fact that we borrowed money. To me, it was a sign my obsession was gone, and I was, normal now. But soon enough, we had enough to pay it, so I went down to the loan office. As I handed the money over, I shivered with delight. This was by far the largest thing I had ever borrowed, and now I was returning it. All of it, if not more. I had never felt more satisfied in my whole life. Even with my promotion, my beautiful wife, my new house, my son, nothing compared to that feeling. It all started to go downhill. At work, I didn't concentrate on work, but on the list of borrowed pens and staplers, rulers and pencils. I spent my working days finding people in the office and returning their stationery. It felt good, so good, but nothing could replicate the feeling of that loan. I would always work overtime too, to save money for loans and I don't know what. My wife noticed me behaving differently. She kept asking if something was wrong, but I didn't reply. I barely spoke to her anymore. She would scream and cry hysterically at me as I checked my list, and her cries were nothing more than a muffled distraction from my obsession. I missed my son's birth. I had to drive up to a coworker who lived in a different town to give him his stapler back. My wife was speechless when I arrived late, and she just cried and cried into her mother's shoulder, who looked at me with disgust. I wasn't even surprised when she filed for divorce. The only thing I cared about when I signed that paper was giving the pen back to the lawyer who had lent it to me. She left me and took my son. My boss fired me because I was doing nothing. All I had was my apartment, which I had already paid off the mortgage on once and attempted to pay it off again with overtime money. I had returned the apartment which I borrowed. I kept borrowing things. I asked strangers for money, watches, clothes, anything, but I was ignored. I needed to borrow something like that loan, something big, something precious. I spent my days in my apartment sitting and eating on leased furniture, which I always paid for every month. However, the financial funding for my obsession had gone down. I had lost my job and nearly spent all my overtime money. I often sent back my benefits to the council after I had touched the money for a while. I would sit and watch news stories of murder, rapes, and a spate of kidnappings on my television to take my mind off the fact that I couldn't borrow anything. I also started going out at night, walking around and borrowing things. I would wake up in strange places before making my way back home. It struck me that I had never borrowed anything and not returned it, so I decided to try that. I walked over to my neighbor's garden and asked if I could borrow his lawnmower until tomorrow. He said it was okay, and I thanked him and took it to my house. I didn't use it. I didn't touch it. I woke the next morning and felt the urge to give the lawnmower back, but I resisted and watched the news to take my mind off it. More of the same shit. Murders, kidnappings, children going missing. Our town news was morbid. I didn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned in emotional pain and distress. Early the next morning, I snapped. I was about to return it when my neighbor showed up at my door and asked for it. Yes, yes, I screamed at my startled neighbor's face. Take it, I'm sorry, I moaned. The neighbor looked worried and quickly took his lawnmower and left. Never again, I swore to myself. My house was a shithole and I couldn't borrow cleaning equipment. I hadn't eaten in 3 days. I had no money. My house reeked. I woke up one morning after one of my nighttime walks and felt pain like never before. I recognized the feeling. I hadn't returned something. I tore my house apart looking for what it was. I smashed windows and broke furniture in my enraged search for what I needed to return. I couldn't stand this anymore. The TV buzzed on about some missing people as I rummaged through my stinking apartment. Then I remembered I used to keep a lot of my borrowed things in the cleaning cupboard. I opened the door and was hit by a putrid smell. I realized the point of my nighttime walks. I wanted to borrow something precious and important. And what was more precious and important to someone than I knew I could have gotten the same feeling by returning them. But that wasn't the bad thing. I didn't care about that. I would have borrowed anything if it gave me that feeling. But what caused me so much pain was that I hadn't returned any of them.